Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian and welcome back to Elite Dangerous. With the recent announcement that fleet carriers will be arriving in December, it seems like a reasonable moment to take some time out and talk about the details we currently know about carriers. Now this is somewhat of an odd subject because on the one hand, officially, we know nothing about fleet carriers and how they will function. On the other hand, Frontier have discussed fleet carriers in the past. Snippets of information were provided on the Squadrons forum feedback post, and some additional details were also provided during one of Frontier's feedback YouTube videos. Keep in mind then that all of this information comes from mid-2018 and was aimed at the original release of carriers. Carriers, of course, are now going to be 1 year later than previously planned, so it's likely that some of this information has changed. However, it's equally likely that much of it will remain the same. Either way, remember that this is not confirmation of anything. Instead, it's a recounting of what Frontier previously discussed, some of which may no longer be relevant, but even still, it does contain some interesting information. So, we already know that fleet carriers are large ships. We have seen as much in the recent teaser trailer. From what can be seen in the trailer, the carrier has at least 8 large pads, plus 4 mediums and 2 smalls. There may also be others that were not visible in the video. We also saw that fleet carriers can move. It seems extremely unlikely that players will be able to directly pilot fleet carriers in the same way they can pilot their other ships. However, in 2018, Frontier envisioned that the squadron member, with the necessary ranks at least, would be able to plot a course for the carrier and then trigger a jump sequence. Likewise, it was also envisioned that a ranking squadron member would be able to purchase upgrades for the fleet carrier. This, of course, implies that the squadron would have some form of global resources which could be used to pay for these upgrades. What type of upgrades these would be is an interesting question. Improved engines, jump drives, shields and maybe even weapons come to mind. Details on the fleet carriers would also be available within the squadron feed. I would assume this means that the current location, the travel routes for the fleet carrier, as well as the ship details. However, Frontier didn't go into specifics on this. Returning to the subject of moving the fleet carrier, Frontier mentioned in 2018 that this would require resources. Now, I'd be surprised if this particular detail has changed, but you never know. The question of exactly how the fleet carrier would move has been a regular discussion among the players. We know it can jump between star systems. We don't know how far though, but given the range of current megaships, which I believe is around 500 light years, this range seems entirely reasonable. The fleet carrier teaser trailer showed the carrier emerging from a witch space rift, and these are the same methods of hyperspace travel that the capital class frigates use. Frontier also confirmed that fleet carriers would be able to jump at any time the squadron chooses, assuming the resources are available, and that they wouldn't need to wait for the weekly tick and server downtime. Frontier were also aiming at visual customization of the fleet carriers, I assume both in terms of cosmetics as well as modules, and this seemed to be a little of an uncertain subject at the time. However, Frontier have had much longer to work on fleet carriers than originally planned, so who knows, maybe. So that covers most of what Frontier have previously discussed about fleet carriers, and admittedly, this really isn't very much. I personally think one of the biggest questions though, that's something I'd really like to hear more information on, is what purpose do the fleet carriers have? That is to say, what function do they serve? Most obviously, it seems that they are mobile bases, ones which can be shared with the squadron. But this leads to a lot of other questions. For example, are they combat capable? Or, at the very least, will they have defences? Are they capable of staking claims to areas or resources? For example, would a fleet carrier parked up near a ring system be able to claim that ring system? Same deal for planets. Also, are fleet carriers suited to long-term exploration? Ownership, of course, is also a major question. Firstly, will everyone be able to own one? Or will carriers be limited to squadron ownership only? Squadron ownership seems most likely, given what we've heard previously about them, and given the fact that they are called fleet carriers after all. But then again, maybe that does reference your own personal fleet. Either way, with the current rules of only being able to join a single squadron, squadron ownership would mean that if a player wants to own a fleet carrier, they would automatically not be able to join another squadron. So yeah, there's lots of questions like this, and a lot more. I'm also sure that many of you have a lot of questions yourself. For me, The important question about fleet carriers is whether or not they will bring new gameplay dynamics to Elite. The idea of fleet carriers being able to stake claims on resources or areas, regions, for me would be a great example of how they could introduce dynamic and emergent gameplay among the player base. But that said, I'm sure that not everyone would want to see this, as many players certainly seem to enjoy Elite for a relaxing, passive experience. However, the galaxy is very large, so I don't see why there couldn't be some room for crossover on this idea. The other side of this, of course, is that fleet carriers won't necessarily introduce new dynamic gameplay at all, but will instead actually be the gameplay. That is, purchasing, upgrading and customizing the carrier will be their main function, in addition to being a mobile base. So that pretty much brings us to the end of some random speculation on what fleet carriers may be, as well as going over some of the information that we previously knew about them. If you've got any points you'd like to raise or any suggestions, ideas or questions, I'd love to hear them. Let me know in the comments section. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.